Good morning, everyone. This is Ben Weisner, your host for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us this morning for Checking Initial Placement in Encore II, presented by Claire Hayes. Claire has been involved with Read Naturally since its development. She consults with educators nationwide to discuss reading, fluency, and the Read Naturally strategy. Claire loves working with teachers to help them maximize the benefits of the various Read Naturally interventions. Claire's presentation will not include time for Q&A today, but please go ahead and ask any questions you may have using the questions tool in your meeting panel, and we'll make an effort to get back to as many of you as possible in the coming days with email responses to questions we may not be able to address today. You should have all received a link to the handouts for today's meeting. Claire will be referring to them during her presentation. The handouts are also available from the meeting panel if you'd like to download and print them out now. Many of you have also asked about a recording of this webinar. We'll be sending out follow-up emails with links to the recording in about 24 hours, so please look for that in your inbox. Feel free to share the recording with anyone at your school or district who you think would benefit from this very valuable information. And finally, if you're having technical difficulties, please contact GoToWebinar support. Their phone number is listed at the bottom of the meeting panel. And now, without further delay, I'm going to pass the microphone off to Claire Hayes, your presenter for today's Read Naturally webinar.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to all of you who are attending the session today. It really says a lot about you as educators to be here to learn about something that might help some of your students, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. My name is Claire Hayes, as Ben said, and I'm excited to talk to you today about checking initial placement in Encore II. There are actually two phases to checking initial or to placement, and the second one is checking initial placement. And so I want to bring your attention to some of the handouts that you will see linked on your meeting panel. There's one that is called the Checking Placement webinar slide handout, and that is something that can be used to take notes. So it's just going to be a copy of each slide from my presentation. And so if you're someone who likes to write things down, feel free to print that out and use it that way. The other one is a link to the instruction and guide for doing checking initial placement. And so that is a good resource for you to reference during this session, but also for in the future when you're actually doing this with your own data and your own students. Okay. The final thing I'm going to reference today is a website that contains a checking initial placement calculator, and we'll actually go through some data using that calculator at the end of this session. So as I mentioned, there are two phases of placement, and the first one is conducting initial placement. So if what you're hoping for today is to do conducting initial placement, which means determining level, selecting series, and setting goals, this is not the webinar. We have another one available for you called Conducting Initial Placement and Encore II, and that is the webinar that helps you understand how to get the right level for the students to begin working in the program. So students cannot start working in the program until you assign them a level, series, and goal. Okay, and there is another webinar that you can access on our website that is now in a recorded format for you. But the phase that we are going to talk about today is the second point that we see down here called checking initial placement. And that happens after you have some data on your students. So this isn't based off of placement information. This is based off of information that is gathered through the program as the students work through the program. And we kind of think of checking initial placement as the bridge between placement and monitoring student performance. Okay, when you are looking into monitoring student performance, it is actually what you do for the vast majority of the time you're working in Encore. When we're at the beginning of the year, we think all about all the things that have to do in order to start, and that there's a lot of them, but actually it's a very short amount of time that those things happen. The rest of the year, you are monitoring student performance. And as you're doing that, you want to make sure that the student is challenged, that they are in as high a level as possible that keeps them challenged, but not to the point of frustration. We want them to be able to reach their goals, but not easily, right? We want them to work for it in order for them to get as much out of the program as possible. And so the first part of monitoring student performance is checking initial placement. And what we do in checking initial placement is we are basically deciding, based on the student data, whether or not their level and goal are accurate. We know that struggling readers are inconsistent, and they could have a good day on placement day. They could have a bad day on placement day. The story they did for placement could be a topic they knew a lot about or nothing about. And so there can be differences based on those factors. And so it is nice to take a look at the student's first 3 stories, the data from those stories, and decide, is this the right level now that we have an average of at least 3? The place you're going to look for this information is in the Encore II graph. You can see on this slide, I show you one that has 3 stories completed, which is the ideal point for doing checking initial placement. After a student has completed 3 stories, you take the averages. At the end of this, we're going to walk through some actual student data, and I will show you the calculator, where you will take the information from a graph like this, plug that data into our online calculator, and the calculator will make a recommendation for you. Okay, and I want you to understand that process that the calculator is doing and the recommendation it is making, so that you know whether or not it's the right one for this student, the particular student you're working with. When we are deciding whether or not they are in the right spot, the first thing we're going to look at is their level right? Okay, so is the level of material that they are working on or in the right one? And to do that, we are going to take a look at 2 different things. The first is we're going to ask ourselves, is the student's average cold timing score within the range for placement? Okay, and so that means after 3 stories, we take the average number. That calculator will help you do that. And what you're taking a look at is based on whatever level they are in. So this first column on the left tells us the level. And on the right, we get the words correct per minute score. So what is their words correct per minute score on their cold scores, the average number? Is it within the range that is recommended based on placement? The next question we ask ourselves is the student's average quiz score at least 60%? Now, this often causes some confusion, upset for teachers. And that's because we don't want our students to be at 60%. We don't ever want them to be at 60%. You know, we all kind of have in our heads 80% or higher. And so this is not to say that we are okay with them being at and staying at 60%. All that we are using this 60% threshold to say is that we will not lower their level if they are at least 60%. And that is after the first 3 stories. So when you think about a student starting a new program, you can think about the fact that there's a big learning curve just to how to do the program. Students are learning how to do the steps. They're learning how to read and answer questions in the program. They're learning what you care about, right? And you need to make sure they know that you care about comprehension. But there's a little bit of a learning curve here. And so we will tolerate a score of at least 60% at first. We will want to see that that score goes up and gets to that 80%, but we will not lower their level if they are at least at 60%. Research shows that if students can get to at least a 60% comprehension rate, there is benefit in those comprehension exercises once they get to that point. And so that is why the threshold is set at that number. So let's take a look at a student. Anna is the first student we're going to talk about today. Anna is in level 5.6. She has an average cold timing score of 90, and here we indicate that the teacher is present. And so that tells us that this cold timing score, of course, is accurate. Her average quiz score is 77, so above 60, not exactly to the 80, but it's all right for the first few stories. So we're going to ask ourselves the 2 questions that I asked previously. So is her cold timing score in the range? And where is her quiz at? We're going to ask those 2 questions to see whether or not the level is the right level. So let's ask those questions one at a time. Here, what you're seeing up here is actually a graph from our online program, Read Naturally Live, where it takes the averages for you. And I use this because it's a very easy sample to show you that average number, and you will use the online calculator or your own calculator to figure out those numbers. But this way they're in order nicely for you. So what we're doing with this data is we're going to decide whether or not Anna's cold timing score is in the range for her placement. We can find her cold timing score here, and the number we see as 90 is the average of how she did on the first 3 stories. So is it within the range for her level 5.6? So we come down to our left column in this table. We see level 5.6, and the range we want is 80 to 100. So is her cold timing score within that range? Yes, it is. It's right within the range of 80 to 100. The next question is about that quiz score. Is she at least at 60%? And over here we can see, yes, she's at 77%. So then we ask ourselves, do we continue, raise, or lower her level? Well, she's right within the range and her comprehension is okay. So that tells us we're just going to continue with her level. Now, because we decided to continue with her level, we are going to go and then ask ourselves about her goal, okay? If the decision had been to raise or lower her level, we would not change her goal. We would leave her goal as is. But because we decided that it was appropriate to keep her level the same, now we're going to go take a look at her goal. So with the goal, now we're thinking about the relationship between the cold timing score and the goal, as well as the relationship between the hot timing score and the goal. So what we want for the average cold timing score, we want it to be about 30 to 40 words below the goal. Okay, so the goal, as you know, is not the long-term fluency goal. It's just that goal within the program that they need to reach in order to pass the story. So for students who are in 4th grade and below, so your younger students, we want their cold scores to be about 30 below their goal. And for students who are in 5th grade and above, we want it to be about 40. We consider it to be too far away if it reaches the 10 threshold. So anything that is 10 or more away tells us that the difference is too great. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through these problems. A difference of 10 or more tells us that it is too great of a difference. We're also going to look at the student's goal and decide is it equal to or slightly less than the average hot timing. Now, we know that their hot timing, in order for them to pass, their hot timing has to be at least to the goal, right? We're not going to pass them if they can't reach that goal. So it's going to have to be at least right to the goal. And so we want it to be there or just slightly above. And again, a difference of about 10 is what tells us it may be too much. 10 or more is too large of a difference. And then we're looking at how many practices. Remember, we want them to practice over and over again in order to make that progress, in order to become automatic. And that is where we will see the best transfer of automaticity to different text, is if we have them do a number of repeated readings. So we want practices between 3 and 10. Okay. So here is a graphic picture of the graph for the cold and hot score that you see in Encore. The goal is listed up here at 120. And we can see that for the cold timing score in this situation, this student's cold timing score is about 30 under the goal. Okay, so if this student is a 4th grader or below, that is perfect. We can also see that the hot timing score is at or slightly greater than the goal. The hot timing score here is 123 and the goal is 120. So that's great. It's a little bit above, which is what we'd expect, but not 10 or more above. So this would be an ideal place that you would want your student to be in order for you to know it's the right level. As you see these differences become greater, that's when you know that a change needs to happen. Okay. So now that we decided Anna's going to be kept in that level 5.6, now we're going to decide whether or not her goal should be raised. Okay. And we're going to take a look at some more questions, the questions we just went over, and we'll do them the same way we did. So we'll do them one at a time. But here's the data that we have for Anna. So again, she's a 7th grader. Her goal is 120. Her average cold timing score is 90, which we looked at before. Her average hot timing score is 132, and she averages 6 practices. So we will ask ourselves whether or not her cold timing score is about 40 away from her goal. We'll ask if her hot timing score is very close to her goal or just slightly above, and then how many times does she practice? So let's take that first question. Does Anna's goal exceed her average cold timing score by about 40? Okay, remember she's a 7th grader, so we want to have that slightly larger difference. And we have her average cold timing score is 90 and her goal is 120. So that's a difference of 30, which we want it to be 40. So that difference there is 10. So actually, no, the goal might be too low. It's getting right into that range where we're going to start to pay closer attention. It might be too low there. So the next question we ask is Anna's goal equal to or slightly less than her hot timing score? So here's her goal, 120, and her hot timing score is 132. So are they about the same or just a little bit apart? No, they're actually 12 apart, which again, that's 10 or more. And so that tells us the goal might be too low. As far as our number of practices, that's a good number. 6 is right about where we want it. And so that part is okay. So now we're going to ask ourselves, should we continue, raise, or lower her goal? Okay. And because we found that 2 of these questions were indicated that the difference was too great, we are likely to raise Anna's goal. Okay. Now what we're going to talk about is another student who is younger. Okay. And Rob is another student who is actually a 4th grade student, and he's in level 3.0. His average cold timing score is 70 and his quiz is 93. So we're going to do the same things we just did with Anna, but now we're going to do it with a different student and different data. So we're ask ourselves those first 2 questions which related to level. Remember the first set of 2 questions. And Rob, we're going to ask, is his average cold timing score in the range for placement, and where is his quiz at? What is his comprehension percentage at? So the first question is Rob's average cold timing score in the range for placement? So in level 3.0, we see that we want the student to be between 30 and 60 words correct per minute. So we can see here is the level range. At 3.0, we want him between 30 and 60. Is his cold timing average in that range? At 70, it is not. It is outside that range. It goes up into that higher level range, okay? The next question is his quiz at least 60? Yes, his quiz is phenomenal, okay? So what does that tell us? His cold timing score is outside of the range. His quiz is fabulous. Are we going to continue, raise, or lower Rob's level? Well, we would raise Rob's level, right? His cold scores indicate that he can actually handle the next level up. And so we would go on and go and move Rob up to level 3.5. Even though he only completed 3 stories, that's okay. He doesn't need to complete all the stories by any means. In fact, the most successful programs are the ones that pay no attention to how many stories they've completed when they move up. They pay attention to the data the student produces through their graphs. And so taking a look at that data and making the decision based on that, not based on number of stories, is very helpful. And so for Rob, he maybe had a bad day on placement, or maybe he was between 2 levels and you picked the lower one. And now you get to have that conversation with Rob where you say, my gosh, you're already doing so well. I can't believe it. You're already ready for a higher level. And for a kid who struggled with reading for a while, you can see how powerful that is, and how motivating that is for him and to want to continue. So that is a very fun conversation to get to have with a student. So now what we're going to do is take a look at Lee's data. This is another graph. Now it's a graph for Lee, and I'm going to actually show you how to do this within the you do the Lee problem within the within the Encore II calculator. Okay, and so we're going to use this graph to do that. And so let's take a look at the questions that we're going to ask, same ones we did before. Is Lee's average cold timing score in the range, and where's his quiz at? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at whether or not Lee's average cold timing score is in that range. For 2.5, we want it to be between 30 and 60. Is it in that range? Yes, it's at 40. Okay. For his quiz, we want it to be at least at 60, and he's at 87. So would we continue, raise, or lower his level? He's right within the range that we want him to be, between 30 and 60, and his quiz is solid. So we're going to go ahead and continue Lee's level. Now, because we decided to continue Lee's level, we're going to have to go take a look at his goal and decide whether or not we're going to look at whether or not his goal should be the same. Okay. So again, here is that graph that we're going to use. And I'm going to show you this in just a minute. After we answer these questions, I'll show you that calculator using the data from this table. Okay. So the questions we ask are whether or not his goal exceeds his cold timing score by about 30. And remember, Lee is a 3rd grader, so that's why we have that lower number of 30 difference. We're also going to find out whether or not his hot timing score is very close to what his goal is. And we're also wondering how many times he's practiced. So the first question is, for Lee, does his goal exceed his average cold timing score by about 30? So his average cold timing score is 41 and his goal is 70. Is that about 30? You bet it is. That's great. Next question, is his goal equal to or slightly less than his average hot timing score? His goal is 70. His average hot timing score is 74. So yeah, that's great. Less than 10, we are doing well. And how many times does he practice? He's practiced 6 times on average. And so that is fine within 3 to 10. So do we raise or lower or continue his goal? We've decided to keep him at that level. We're also going to keep him at that goal. Okay, so placement did well for him that day. He's in the right spot, so we're going to let him keep on going. Now I'm going to show you how that looks within the checking initial placement calculator that can be found on our website. Okay, if you take a look at this graph over here, this is that graph we just saw for Lee. So if we zoom in here a little bit on Lee's data, we can see that his score, his cold timing score listed right down here, were 41, 39, and 42. Okay, so we came over here, we can come over here, enter Lee's name, and we have this name option here for you in case you want to print this out and have a record of it. Also, it's easy to, what I like to do is have a whole bunch of them open. As you can see here, I have one for Anna, I have one for Rob, and then I can keep a different one going for each student. So with Lee, I list his grade as level 3. He is in the sequence series. His level is 2.5. And his initial goal, which we can see right here on our graph, is 70. So his initial goal is 70, and he has completed how many stories? Well, we have 3 bar graphs there, so we know he's completed 3 stories. So it tells us in this grayed out section that I cannot edit, that is filled in automatically with the range for placement. So you don't have to remember the range for placement or look up in your placement packet to find it or on our website. This calculator will remember it for you. So look, if I put Robin 3.5, that's going to change his placement range, because once you get to 3.5, the words correct per minute range changes. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put him back in the actual level that he's in, and then we see that that placement range goes back to that 30 to 60 number where he should be. So now what I did was I took the numbers from over here, and look under here, we have 3 different numbers for our cold timing. We have the number of words he attempted. Underneath it is the number of errors, and then we just did the math problem. So the number I am going to put into this calculator is the words correct per minute. Okay, so I want that bottom score that lists the number of words correct per minute. So the number attempted subtracted by the number of missed gives us our 41, 39, 42. So you can see I entered those into here, and I got an average score. Then I listed how many practices, which should be listed on the graph if your students are completing them properly. So please try to have them do that. If they haven't put them in, you can figure it out by going back to their story, looking at their actual story, and the number of, because at the bottom there, they write how their cold or their practice scores down. So you can just count there too. Then the next column is, or row, is hot timing score. So here we can see the hot timing score is listed because, again, we have the number of words attempted, subtracted, then we subtract the errors, and we get a words correct per minute score for the hot score. So it's 74, 71, and 77, which gives us an average of 74. Okay. For quiz, we're going to take a look up here. And the percentage of correct listed goes down. So because all the boxes are filled in red for this first column, he got 5 correct there. This one, it looks like he missed his inference question. So he only got 4 out of 5 correct, which is what I put in there. And then on the most recent story, he also missed a question. This time he missed main idea. And I put 4 out of 5 there, which gives me his comprehension percentage. All right. Then it lists the recommendation. So it's telling us, for Lee, we want to continue with level 2.5, okay? It's also telling us to continue his goal as 70, okay? So you can see that we figured it out by asking ourselves those questions and looking in the data, and the calculator gave us that recommendation based on us putting this in there. So if we take a look at Rob, for example, let's see if they came up with the same thing we did. Okay, remember Rob was a 4th grader in 3.0, and here was his initial goal. Here are the cold timing scores that he did initially. He was averaging 70. You may remember that from our discussion. His average cold timing score was 70. He practiced an average of 4 times. His hot timing average was 100. Okay, and his quiz average, remember, it was quite good. It was at that 93%. And the very thing that it is recommending is to raise Rob's level. And remember, that was exactly what we wanted to do after looking at the data. Okay, so this calculator will get you to the same place I did by walking you through the steps, or the same place that checking initial placement worksheet that is available on our website will get you. Okay, so both the worksheet and the calculator will get you there, and the calculator will actually just spit out the answer for you, so sometimes you can maybe do it on your own after you become familiar with it, but for the first few, when you're getting familiar with it, sometimes it's nice to have an answer listed for you. So feel free to use this calculator as much as you want for this activity. Okay. So ideally, you would do this for all your students after they've completed about 3 stories. And then once you are done with that, going to go through these data, and we answered these questions already. So he practiced that many times, so we decided to continue his goal, okay? Which is exactly what that calculator told us as well. So after you've done your checking initial placement, after you've taken a look at their data after 3 stories, you've plugged it into that calculator, or you've gone through the worksheet that is attached as your handout and made the decision based on following the instructions in the worksheet, the next phase is really where you spend the rest of the year, and it's keeping students challenged. And so that's where I talked about initially, where you want to keep students in a level that is as hard for them as they can handle without being frustrated. So that is one of the reasons I think the program works so well, is we do place students in a level that is quite challenging for them. And we're able to do that because the program provides lots of support, right? They read along with the audio CD, they practice over and over again, and so they can handle this challenging material. And that is one of the reasons we think that the program is able to accelerate their progress so much. And so constantly changing or constantly looking at their data to see when they are ready for a higher level or a higher goal gives you a great way to encourage them to stay challenged all the time and to make sure that they are going to remain challenged all the time. The other thing to keep in mind is that it is good to take a look at the averages, the most recent 3 stories, okay? So when you're keeping students challenged over time, one data point is not enough to make you make a decision about raising or lowering a level or goal, okay? You want to look at averages. Kids have good days and bad days. So if they have one really good day or one really bad day, you're not going to make a change. You want to take a look at the most recent, about 3 is a good number, and see, are they making progress? Where are they at? And so I encourage you to try to use those averages instead of just one data point. Okay. So here is my contact information. The first section is listed, the Read Naturally customer service contact information. So feel free to reach out to any of us. We are here to help. If you have a question about data that you want to discuss about one of your students, you're not sure what to do, please feel free to email me or call me directly. And my information is listed there as well. And I would just again like to thank all of you for tuning in today. I hope this information is helpful. As your questions arise, do reach out to us. That's why we're here. And thank you so much for all that you do for your students. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Claire, and thanks to everyone for attending our webinar. Another reminder that we'll be sending out follow-up emails with links to the recording in about 24 hours, so please look for that in your inbox. Feel free to share the recording with anyone at your school or district. Also, if you could, please respond to the survey that will appear on your screen as you exit the webinar so we can continue to improve this educational experience for all of you in the future. Thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful day.